Recently, ORTUR reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to test out the Laser Master 3. Now, instead of doing the typical unboxing, getting started assembly style video, they wanted to know if I was open to showing you guys how I use the machine to tackle a few different projects. And it turns out that I've got a lot of different ideas rolling around in my head and different projects to take on. So I thought this would be a great excuse to get some of those things off my to-do list. And I've got 3 different projects here for you guys. And additionally, I do have a modification that I made to the machine, and that is a fume extractor or smoke extractor nozzle. Now, I've done this on a few other laser engravers and laser cutters, and they seem to be very popular, so I did it on the Laser Master 3. And if you guys are looking for the fume extractor nozzle, check out my website. And if you guys are looking for any other design files or resources related to the projects that I'm about to walk you through, check the video description down below. Otherwise, big shout out to ORTUR for sending me this machine. I really appreciate it, and let's get started. And so first off, what you're looking at here is a picture of a logo that was embossed on some car interior fabric. And this logo was sent to me by a friend, and the goal of this project here was to reproduce this logo on some similar fabric for the restoration of his car seats. In order to process this on the laser, I needed to bring the picture into Photoshop so that I could trace it out and create a vectorized form of the logo so that I could properly scale it. And since the original photo lacked quite a bit of contrast, I had to do all of the tracing manually. It didn't take too long, but in the end, I was able to come up with a very clean logo to work with. And in order to get the vector files, I did have to import this eventually into Adobe Illustrator, but you could also use Inkscape, which is free. Now with the Laser Master 3, you can run it off of a few different software packages, one of them being Laser GRBL, and that is my go-to, but you can also run it off of Lightburn, as well as the Laser Explorer app, which you can download on iOS and Android. And with the app, you can actually just import an image and create your engraving or cutting patterns right on the app and send it right to the machine. In all of the examples that I'm using in this video, I have used Laser GRBL. It's free and very easy to learn. You'll be up and running in a few minutes. What you're watching now is the engraving process of that logo on some sample cloth that I received. Now this cloth is 100% polyester cloth. I received the material from a trusted source, and I do believe that it is 100% polyester, because we should consider laser safety here for a minute. Some cloth, as well as some fake leather, contain PVC, and this is not something that you want to process on your laser cutter or engraver. Vaporizing PVC can result in some really nasty gases that you definitely don't want to breathe in, so be sure whatever material you're processing, you know what it's made of and you know what's in it. When researching the safety of lasering polyester, I did find online that some synthetic fibers and cloths do have a PVC coating or backing on them. So just again, be very careful. I would hate to see any of you guys get hurt when processing the wrong material. So now let's talk about settings for this job. Now this 100% polyester material seemed pretty delicate and thin, and I didn't want to burn through it. It has a velour-like feel to it, and it's almost like the top layer is a really short shag carpet. I figured I'd play it safe and only go with 20% power, and I went with 7,500 millimeters per minute. This was the filling speed in Laser GRBL with a border speed of 5,000 millimeters per minute. Now normally what I would do for most of these kinds of logos, I would go with line-to-line tracing, and the laser head would go faster. When I had it on vectorize, it never really seemed to get up to the 7,500 millimeters per minute. Perhaps I should have just went with the line-to-line tracing. So this job took about 25 minutes to complete, but again, I was being very conservative with the settings, and this was a one-off job, so I didn't really try and optimize the time. Of course, if I were to have to run off 100 of these things, I would be looking for time savings by increasing the speed and increasing the power. The Laser Master 3 can support speeds up to 20,000 millimeters per minute, which is blazing fast. But to achieve those speeds, again, this is going to depend on the pattern that you're trying to cut and the room that the machine has to accelerate and decelerate from those speeds. Overall, I was really pleased with the results, and you can see here that the top layer of the fabric, which I had said was kind of like a short shag carpet, ended up getting singed or melted down and leaving behind a darker look to it. So you can definitely see that Indy 500 logo, and it's nice and clear. And if you hold it up to the light, it didn't melt through enough where the fabric looks too thin. So I think it should hold up to the wear and tear of a car interior. If you want to tackle something similar, one other consideration is the color of the material that you're trying to process. In this case, red worked nicely, but if you're trying white or blue, the laser is blue and it will reflect it back rather than absorb it. Moving on to project number 2, if you guys are anything like me, you enjoy a cup of coffee, but sometimes it can just be overwhelming deciding which pod or flavor to choose. Therefore, I decided to leave the very important decision to chance, and I came up with this novelty item, which I like to call Coffee Pod Roulette. You can fit up to 10 Nespresso virtual pods in it, and you give it a spin, and the one that you land on is the one that you'll be drinking. And this design contains a combination of laser cut and 3D printed parts, but in this video, we're going to be focusing on the laser cut parts. I'm using tab and slot joints to get the laser cut parts to fit together. Now, in a previous video, I showed this clearance test that I designed in order to test tab and slot joints for 3mm thick material. Since I have yet to tackle tab and slot joints on this particular machine, I figured it was a good idea to run this test on the Laser Master 3 so that I could determine the proper clearances and tolerances on the parts that I designed. Now, you will notice that the part does say kerf test and not clearance test. Technically, it's not a kerf test unless you first compensate for variables like variations in the material thickness, the accuracy of the motion system of the machine, and things like offsets applied by the toolpath generating software, etc. That being said, kerf is only a 4-letter word and it fit a lot better when engraving it on the part, so I just left it at that. The 10-watt laser module had no problem getting through the 3mm birch ply. Now, on the ORTUR website, it does say that it will cut through 3mm basswood in one pass at 500mm per minute at the full power setting. Now, I don't know if birch is slightly more dense or harder to get through than the basswood, but I had to slow it down to 300mm per minute to make it through in one pass. One other thing you guys may have noticed is that while I was cutting and engraving this wood, there wasn't a whole lot of smoke being produced, and that's because of the Fume Extractor nozzle that I had designed and told you guys about at the beginning of the video. If you guys are looking for that add-on, check the video description down below, and if you're looking for these design files for this clearance test, that will also be in the video description down below. After cutting the clearance test, the conclusion that I came to was that the Laser Master 3 cuts uniformly in both the X and Y direction, and in order to get a nice tight tab and slot fit, you have to undersize your slots by 0.2 millimeters. Therefore, I made that adjustment to the Coffee Pod Roulette parts, and then I got to work cutting those. First up was the wheel that all of the coffee pods get attached to, and again, all of these parts are 3mm thick birch ply, and I was using 300mm per minute at 100% power. And while this thing is cutting, you might notice two other accessories in addition to the Fume Extractor nozzle. The first one being the steel mesh work table underneath my workpiece, and believe it or not, this is just a memo board from IKEA. The entire machine sits directly on top of it, and it lifts the workpiece off of your table so the laser can pass through it very clean and you don't get any burn marks on the bottom of your workpiece. Best of all, it's only $20, and I'll put a link to that down in the video description as well. Now, the second thing, which is a little harder to see, is the gray silicone mat sitting underneath of that work table that I just mentioned. I use this mat on all of my open frame laser cutters that sit on top of my work tables, and this protects the table from getting burnt from the laser that passes through the workpiece. The silicone mat can withstand really high temperatures, and by the time the laser passes through the workpiece and then down through that memo board that I just told you about, the beam itself is quite diffused and it will not cut through that silicone mat. I actually even ran a test in a previous video where I put the workpiece directly on top of the mat and cut right through, and it still didn't go through that silicone. If you guys are looking for one of these mats, go ahead and check the video description. I'll put a link down there. After the job was complete, the part came out nice and clean, and one of the things I've been really impressed with so far with this machine is that with these through cuts in wood, I'm not seeing a lot of charring or burning around the cut edges like I've seen on previous machines, and this is without using any sort of air assist. This obviously keeps your parts looking really nice and reduces the amount of post-processing you'd have to do in order to get a presentable part. This next panel has all of the support pieces to hold up the coffee pod roulette wheel, and the front piece itself has my logo engraved on the front of it. Now unfortunately, I kind of screwed up the position of my logo on the front support piece. When I imported the file into Laser GRBL, I didn't notice that I had a 3mm offset set in the X direction for the engraving procedure, and so my logo is off-center by about 3mm. For the engraving, I also slowed it down to 15,000 millimeters per minute at the 100% power setting because I thought that I wanted to get a little bit of a darker burn in that logo, but as it turns out, 15,000 millimeters per minute was actually too slow, and I should have went with the 20,000 and the logo would have come out a lot cleaner. You can see here in these clips that the logo looks a little bit too burnt. Otherwise, I had left all of the through cuts at 300 millimeters per minute at 100% power, and those came out very clean. It was pretty rare, but every once in a while I did have one little part where the laser did not pass completely through, but that's pretty easy to resolve with a sharp hobby knife. Best of all, my clearance tests seemed to have worked, and all the adjustments that I made to the dimensions on the files turned out perfect. The parts fit together really snug, and they are not going to wiggle loose, but they're not too tight that I would damage the parts putting them together. It's pretty satisfying getting the dimensions just right like this, because then you don't have to resort to using any wood glue or fasteners. And with all the laser cut parts complete, I could perform the rest of the assembly with the 3D printed parts. The wooden wheel in combination with some flexible 3D printed fingers will hold each of the coffee pods in place and prevent them from flying out while the wheel is spinning. Inside of the 3D printed center hub, there is a detent mechanism that I designed so that, in theory, when the wheel stops spinning, the red arrow is always aligned with a coffee pod and it never really gets stuck somewhere in between two pods. That feature works fairly well, but I do think I'll have to experiment a little bit with the spring tension to get it perfect. Overall, I was really pleased with how this novelty piece turned out, and after loading in all of the pods and spinning the wheel fairly aggressively a few times, none of the pods came flying out. The Nespresso pods are also pretty colorful on the backside, so you could display this thing in the other direction and it wouldn't look too bad sitting on your counter. Let me know down in the comment section if you guys think you would use one of these things. And now that I've had my coffee, we're ready for the third and final project of this video. For a while now, I've wanted to build a shadow box, but I wanted to do something a little more unique than the paper layered shadow box that's uniformly backlit. And so I came up with this design here that's going to use wood instead of paper. Now the wood is not going to allow light to pass through, but there is an acrylic element in there that's going to allow light to pass through, and I've incorporated a clock up in the top right hand corner with this LED matrix. The clock is going to get run by a small Wi-Fi capable microcontroller that will connect to an NTP server to sync the time, and then behind all of these wooden and acrylic elements, I'm going to have some RGB neopixels in the bottom left hand corner. So rather than a uniform backlight, I'm going to be able to simulate things like sunrise and sunset. I used the Laser Master 3 to get through the 3mm birch ply with the same settings that I used in the previous project, so the 300 millimeters per minute at 100% power to get those through cuts. Truthfully, I can't take credit for the artistic design of these trees. These are SVG files that I paid for and downloaded online. However, I did make some minor changes to the design to better suit the project and the vision for the project that I had in mind. These trees took about 12 minutes to cut, and as you've seen with the previous cuts on 3mm birch ply, they came out looking fantastic. All of the small details were left intact, and if you're the type of person crafting ornaments or perhaps jewelry, things with very fine and small details, I'm confident that this would work well for you. I've seen some people make some pretty ornate objects like Christmas decorations and ornaments in the shape of snowflakes, as well as jewelry with some really small fine features, and they've turned out great on machines like this. Using the same settings, I cut the layer with the mountains on it, and no surprises here, that came out looking great as well. At first I was contemplating leaving these layers bare wood, and then I decided to paint them, and I just used some regular acrylic paint. Once the layers were in solid colors, I still felt like something was missing. So then I got into some shadows and highlights, And then I thought it would look pretty cool as a snow-capped mountain scene. So for the mountains, I added some snow on the top, a tree line at the bottom of the mountains, and the rest of the trees in the foreground also got a little bit of snow on the tops of each of the trees. It's not often I get a chance to paint, so I really tried to channel my inner Bob Ross here, and I thought each of the individual pieces turned out looking alright, and when you stack them up, they look even better. Now, some of the finer details of the assembly of this shadow box are outside of the scope of this video. I'm definitely going to make a future video covering all of the details of the design and build of this shadow box, so if you guys are interested in that, be sure to hit that subscribe button and keep an eye out for that video. One thing I want to point out while you're watching this sped up version of the assembly is that this white piece here, which is meant to represent the sun, is currently made out of this white piece of acrylic. In my original 3D rendering, I actually wanted to make this out of red acrylic. With blue diode lasers like the one on the Laser Master 3, typically you're going to be able to cut darker acrylics like black or perhaps even a dark red. I had intended on trying out a translucent dark red acrylic on the Laser Master 3, but I ultimately decided to go with this milky white acrylic because when I was playing around with those NeoPixel RGB LEDs, when shining through the red acrylic, it really messed up the way the colors looked and I wasn't really happy with it. Therefore, with white or clear acrylic, it's not likely to work, and I ended up having to cut that white piece on a CO2 laser. But maybe you guys have some tips or tricks on cutting things like white or clear acrylic using a blue diode laser, and if you guys do, I would love to hear about them down in the comments section below. At the back of the frame, there are two more plastic layers that could be made from acrylic and could be cut on the Laser Master 3. The first one is a thin, medium gray translucent sheet, and that one I could not find locally in acrylic. I had to improvise by using a dollar store binder cover, and I didn't want to put that in the laser because I thought it was actually made from PVC. The layer behind that is a 3mm thick, solid black sheet. Now this one I had in my basement and I thought it was acrylic, but as it turns out, it's ABS. ABS is another material that I would avoid cutting on this machine as it emits a harmful gas and tends to melt rather than cut. If I had more time or wanted to invest more money into this project, then I would have just got a sheet of black acrylic, or alternatively, I could have used some hardboard. I ended up using what was available to me and I cut that black ABS on a CNC machine instead of a laser cutter, but if you guys were tackling a similar project using the Laser Master 3, you could easily just go with that acrylic or hardboard. In the end, the result is what I think is this pretty cool looking shadow box clock with sunrise and sunset RGB LED effects. It's obviously a spin-off of the traditional shadow box, but it could be a pretty interesting bedside piece because of the clock and that sunrise and sunset feature. Speaking of which, let's take a look at that now. The sunrise and sunset times in the microcontroller are preset. Now for this video, I sped up the animation to run over the course of 2 minutes, but normally it would run over half an hour. Under normal operation with the longer transition time, the effect is very seamless. During the day, the LEDs remain a bright white, and then when the sunset hour triggers, the animation plays in reverse and you get the sunset effect. During night hours, the LEDs are a dark blue, and I wanted to add a starlight twinkling effect, but that's something I need to work on still. That wraps it up for these 3 projects that I was able to get off of my to-do list with the help of the ORTUR Laser Master 3. I had a lot of fun using this machine and I thought it was pretty easy to set up and get going, although I could be a little bit biased in that regard because I have used other laser cutters before. That being said, ORTUR is a very popular brand in the laser cutting community, and so if you're a person that's just getting started, there's a lot of community support out there for you, including tons of YouTube videos on getting started with these machines. Comparing the Laser Master 3 with previous generations of laser cutters from ORTUR, you can really tell that they wanted to take it to the next level with this model. The overall construction seems really solid and the fit and finish is quite impressive. One feature that I really appreciate is that unlike other laser cutters in the same price range, The Laser Master 3 has enclosed electronics. Therefore, if you're using this thing in your garage or workshop where there's a lot of wood dust or other particles floating around, they're not going to settle on the electronics board. Plus, the machine looks really nice as it's made from custom extrusions and anodized in a beautiful silver color. If you're thinking about picking up one of these machines, I'll put a link in the video description down below. That's it for this video. I really appreciate you guys for sticking around right to the end, and a big thank you goes out to ORTUR for sending me the Laser Master 3. I genuinely enjoyed using this machine and I can foresee myself using it for future projects. So if you guys are looking for more ORTUR content, keep an eye out on my channel, consider subscribing, and you might see more of this stuff in the future. Now, if you guys are looking for design files and resources related to any of the projects that I covered in this video, check the video description down below. You'll also find a link down there to the smoke and fume extractor nozzle that I developed for the Laser Master 3. So if you have one of these machines, definitely go check out that link. It's going to take you to my website, embracemaking.com, where you can support me and my channel. These videos take quite a bit of time and effort to produce, and if you guys have found any sort of value in these videos, I would appreciate any support that you could give back to me. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.